please take your seats. Welcome back. We are moving from the facts and the figures through the negotiated approach to topics of mediation and arbitration. I'd just like to recall the words of the Deputy Mayor that this event is one of the activities of the centennial of the Peace Palace. That's one. And the second, it's also an activity during the International Year of Water Cooperation of the United Nations. It's now my pleasure to invite Professor Alan Wolf. He just told me that it's almost impossible to keep professors to allocated time, but he promised me you can shoot me off the dais if needed. Professor Wolf is professor at Oregon State University, and he will speak about mediation as a tool for for solving water-related disputes. Aaron.
Terrific. Thank you. I saw the program, and I saw the professors lined up, and I thought, and Hank's been sending, those of you who aren't speakers don't know, Hank's been sending these really polite but firm emails. No more than 4 slides, no more than 20 minutes. We really need to keep straight on time. And I saw all these professors. He doesn't know we only speak in 50-minute blocks. And so there was no way that, but I promised, and David was right on time. I promise a lot of slides, but 20 minutes on the dot. The first thing is I'm going to make a quick correction. I'm not going to speak about mediation at all because I don't do mediation. I think there's a sheet that was handed out, put on your chair. The first time I came to the Peace Palace, I was a grad student, and I had assumed 2 things about water and conflict. One, that there were a lot of water wars, and was looking at the time as a grad student for evidence of them, wasn't finding much. And also that somehow, somewhere, there was a body that was just resolving all these international water disputes. So at the time, this must have been 1992 or 3, and I came here. I had a grant to come and study, and I came here to the library. I said, can I please have all the files of all the times that you guys must have resolved all these water disputes since your creation just after World War II? And there was absolutely nothing. And it stunned me. And it stunned me for what we've come collectively to understand is that neither of these things happen. There's very little official mediation at the international level, specifically around water. There's some, and a number of people in the room have dealt with that. And at the same time, there's very, very little violence specifically around water, specifically across international borders. So if not that, what is it we do? How do they get resolved? Because they do get resolved. There's some 600 water treaties that have been signed since World War II. Conflicts do come up around the world, as we know, because we're here. But they also get resolved, which we know because we're here. So the question is how? What I work as is 2 things. One, I try and study these processes at a global level. But 2, about half of my time I'm in the room doing not formal mediation, but facilitation. And that's at all different levels. It's in the Western U.S., believe it or not, we have some water conflict. And internationally, at an international level, how do you create better processes so that these 2 issues that we deal with can be handled together? And the second correction I make is we're not solving water disputes, because I don't think these disputes ever get resolved. As Shafiq mentioned, water management is conflict management. It's always multi-stakeholder. Anytime you're managing a scarce resource, there's continuously going to be conflict. And we use that, 1, to facilitate dialogue. It gets people in the room. But 2, to help craft solutions, not just around water, but as we're here hoping that it ekes out into the rest of the world and can help facilitate a process of peace building. So to start with, this is a problematique. This is our problem in maps. The left-hand side is the way water people see the world through watersheds. And again, Shafiq showed these different scales. We see the things that bind us, the quality, the quantity, the surface water, the groundwater. It's all connected, and those pesky international borders just keep getting in the way of efficient water management. If only we didn't have these pesky borders, we wouldn't have any water problems at all. Unfortunately, we do. And then the figure on the right is the way the rest of the world sees watersheds. Those boundaries are there for very legitimate reasons, protecting sovereignties and economies and ethnic groups and all kinds of things that boundaries do. And so this isn't a question of which of these is right or wrong. This is our reality. We have to manage the resource as if the world looked the way it does on the left, while recognizing the very legitimate boundaries and barriers that are there to protect the things that are protected by the world on the right. This is in IR theory, and because my university allows me to come, I have to put some theory up. The realists see this as high politics, these grand international, the flag issues versus low politics, the kind of on-the-ground water issues. And the realists say that you can't solve water problems without solutions at the national level. The functionalists, on the other hand, they say the opposite, that if you start on the ground solving things like water, electricity, cross-boundary flies, whatever it is, then it moves up into a process of peace building and impacts the politics. And again, what I'm going to suggest is it's not an either-or. In facilitation, we're taught every time we see an or, turn it into an and. We have to recognize that both exist simultaneously. There's the water issues, there's the politics, and to do this work right, we have to know them both. Just out of curiosity, how many people here feel they're mostly trained on the diplomatic, political, social side? How many people feel they're mostly trained on the water resources side? How many people feel they've been adequately trained in both? Yeah, 4 people, that's what I thought. So this is a really important point. I'm also wondering if all the political people sat on this side for a reason. There's some psychology there that I haven't figured out. Let me give a couple of examples of where we've done this well and poorly. This is a project some of you may remember called the Peace Canal. This was a canal that was coming from the Tigris-Euphrates to the Jordan. As we've heard earlier, the Jordan's out of water. Some of the neighbors there have issues with the other neighbors there. And this idea was that a canal would come through the Golan Heights and act, one, as a water canal, but also as a tank barrier. It's huge, massive. It was going to cost $3 billion to build. It was an interesting idea, except the politics hadn't really been thought out. But one, the water hadn't been thought out, because if you cost this out, a tomato would cost about $150. But two, the politics hadn't really been thought out, because if the politics are good enough between Israel and Syria for the water to flow, you don't need a tank barrier. And if it's not, you're not going to allow the water to flow. Another place where it wasn't thought out well, and this was by me, was the first time I went to the Salween Basin. I had been asked to help craft a discussion, so one next to the Mekong. The riparians are China, Myanmar, and Thailand. And this was the late 1990s, and I did all due diligence. Again, I've been trained in both the water and the policy side, so I went in advance. I went to all 3 countries. I met with everybody. What are your interests? What are your issues? How would you like to resolve these? Everybody was on board, including, surprisingly, remember, Myanmar at the time was a very different country, and they had agreed to come to this meeting until I got home and sent out the invitation. The official invitation, everybody had agreed, setting the date for September 9th, 1999. At which point, the government of Myanmar sent an official, they withdrew from the meeting, an official protest suggesting they weren't coming. It was clear now that we were in the hands of the opposition, and that for political reasons, they were not going to step foot into this political ambush. Any ideas? Anybody know, except for our Myanmar friends? September 9th, 1999 is 9/9/99, and the election that was overthrown by a military coup was August 8, 1988. So 8/8/88 was the day of rage that led to the military government in Myanmar. And clearly, when we had set 9/9/99 as the date of our meeting, we were obviously making a numeric nod towards the opposition, and clearly we were in their hands. So knowing the political nuance, and a lot of times water people would just love for this not to be an issue. I've optimized, I know the answer, I've got it all efficient, here's the answer, if you cooperate, here's the benefits. And those pesky politics get in the way. And the opposite is also true. The political people would love to get water, but they keep saying things like, the dam is going to stop up the river. Clearly this dam upstream, a full dam can't stop anything. A full dam has no storage in it. And so the idea that you really have to get both is a critical issue. And one of the places, this is one of the most studied basins in the world. I think if reports were water, the Jordan wouldn't have an issue at all. One of the most studied basins in the world, and interestingly, and again, Shafiq mentioned the Johnston negotiations in the 50s, which relied on solving the water problem and assuming the politics would fall into place, and they didn't. But then in the 90s, when the peace process actually started, they did this in, I think, one of the most nuanced and effective ways. They created two tracks in the peace process. One was the bilateral track, was the high political issues, the boundary issues, the sovereignty issues between Israel and each of its neighbors. But then in parallel was the multilateral track on 5 sets of issues, one of which was water resources, and the idea that they would influence each other. If you could move a little bit with sovereignty, maybe you could move a little bit with water. If you moved a little bit with water, maybe that would help the confidence building that would then lead to more movement on the sovereignty issue. Until today, the only one of these tracks that survives is the water track. And I asked the guy, some of you saw an Israeli delegation, Rama Viram was the head of the multilaterals, the Israeli Foreign Ministry at the time. I said, what is it about water? Because I get asked that. Is something unique about water that it drives cooperation? And he thought about it, and he said, you know, I don't know, but I think that water people, one, they have a language that transcends borders. Right? Water people get water, no matter who they are. 2, they work in units that transcend borders. They think in watersheds and not in borders. And 3, and then he stopped and he said, you know, I think they're just nicer people. So, be that as it may, the water track does survive, and we'll hear some examples of that later in this meeting. Another lesson, if you get stuck on a problem, make it bigger. And I think this is something, again, there's a lot of experience here in the room. A lot of times we get focused on what we think is the issue. But as David Gray said, the issue is never the issue. We're talking about a dam. It's not about the dam. It's about the people. It's about the sovereignty. It's about internal politics. And people will not agree internationally until it's in their internal political interest to do so. And this is important. I had the pleasure to visit our colleagues in Uzbekistan here on the Aral, and some of you who follow the news know there's a little dam that's planned in the biggest dam in the world that's planned in Tajikistan. And there's problems between upstream and downstream, as we find in a lot of places around the world. And a lot of the focus has been on the dam. What is it about the dam that's causing the problem? How do you help the parties come to some kind of an agreement? And yet, if you broaden out and you think, what are the other issues? And there's a lot of political issues surrounded with the dam, but there are other issues that both complicate and allow for baskets of benefits to be generated. If you start to broaden out and think, okay, what's the dam for? It's about timing downstream. It's about energy. Okay, now we're talking about agriculture. Now we're talking about the power lines where they go, including south into Afghanistan, natural gas flowing upstream, and the political interests are not just the interests of Central Asia, but we have to also talk about Russia, China. United States is looking for a way to get out of Afghanistan here through Central Asia. All of these interests together one, confound the issue and complicate it where you just want to throw up your hands and say, why can't it just be about water? But two, if you really look carefully at it, allow for a generation of benefits and a basket of benefits to be crafted in a way that it could be to everybody's interest to come to some kind of agreement on the dam, as long as other benefits add. And we've seen this, and again, David has been a champion, as a number of people in the room on the Nile Basin, the same thing. The idea was that if you just focus on quantities of water, you don't get anywhere. That's a zero-sum game. Think about all the benefits of water. Think about the infrastructure, the roads, the transportation, the barges, if you look at all of these, and again, each has its own nuance and its own politics involved, but there's generally something that can be done at any political given point in time, and generally a basket can be created so that it's in everybody's benefit to collaborate. Next point I want to make: people matter. Again, I'm a professor. My background's in the sciences. I've for years forgot that people were involved in this stuff, and people are at the heart of it. More recently, my research is about small groups of people in a room, because no matter what, that's who's resolving these issues. It's not at the global optimizing, modeling level. It's small groups of people in a room. How do they talk to each other? How do they listen to each other? How do they come to an agreement? And how do they then influence the world that we deal with? And I just wanted to talk about two champions here. Dwight Eisenhower, who was a military guy before World War I. He was tasked with driving across the United States to see what the road network was like. Any guesses how long it took him? 4 months. 4 months to drive across the United States. He then, those of you who know some of this history, became the champion of the U.S. National Highway System. Because his idea, and he became entrenched in this idea, was technology helps resolve security issues. And so first it was the roads, later on, as you'll see, other sets of issues. The idea that technology and security writ large go hand in hand. And then David Lilienthal was the opposite. He was a guy, Jewish roots, socialist roots, from the Midwest United States, who basically saw technology as a way to bring people out of poverty. Primarily water resources development. He then became the head of the Tennessee Valley Authority and later the Atomic Energy Commission. While he was head of the Tennessee Valley Authority, he and Eisenhower were talking about this idea of technology and what it can do beyond the immediate issues. Tennessee Valley Authority, very successful water management body. Nehru came visiting, and David Ben-Gurion, the Prime Minister of Israel, was interested. Lilienthal called his buddy at the World Bank, Spencer Black, president of the World Bank, who then went to India, and that became the roots of the Indus Water Treaty in 1960, and also became the roots, as Shafiq mentioned, of the Johnston negotiations in the 1950s, and interestingly, a huge Water for Peace meeting in 1967. This is the month before the Six-Day War breaks out in Washington. 3,600 people were there to talk about this new nuclear technology and how it could be used to generate development, poverty alleviation, and therefore peace, including an idea for nuclear power plants, nuclear agro-industrial complexes, 5 of them in the Jordan Basin. This also is an interesting idea, but there were some in the U.S. policymaking establishment that thought sending nuclear technology to the Middle East just after the Six-Day War was probably not a good idea. Last point I want to make: education matters. When I ask who's trained how and how many people have been trained both, very few people were able to raise their hands, because this kind of training to learn water and diplomacy hand in hand almost doesn't happen. Universities don't work that way. We work in departments, we work in fields, we work in disciplines. There are exceptions, and I want to note East Anglia, Shafiq's program at Tufts, ours at Oregon State, and of course the UNESCO-IHE. I'm really proud to be working with our colleagues in UNESCO-IHE and University of Peace to think about how we can better train Shafiq mentioned, is the next generation of water leaders. We're developing a program where students, master's students, would start at the University of Peace in Costa Rica, learn about diplomacy, peacemaking, and the connection to resources, then come here to Delft, to UNESCO-IHE to learn, well, everything else, and then come to Oregon State for advanced conflict management and working at a practical level with some law training as well. So the conclusions, is it high politics or low politics? The answer is yes. An altruistic champion, so much of this is about individuals who really care about making a difference. Often they have both water and security experiences, a process thoughtful about both high and low politics and how they interact with each other, and finally, clearly, as a professor, universities are at the center of the universe. Thank you very much.